Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to the sixth of a weekly series of conversations intended to help pioneer educators in the classroom. Teachers have a critical role to play in identifying signs and symptoms that a child may need help with. Teachers can identify students with concerning changes from previous functioning, such as academic decline, worsening attendance, or withdrawal from activities that could signal a reason for concern. Teachers are facing new challenges, in particular, as we work from home. So welcome to this special edition, Trauma in the Classroom. I want to offer a special welcome to pioneers joining us from all over the country, and welcome as well to friends of the university joining us. My name is Robin Cautin. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Sacred Heart University, and I'm pleased to introduce our featured speakers. First, we have Jennifer Wilson. Dr. Jennifer Wilson is a licensed clinical social worker and assistant clinical professor of social work in Sacred Heart University School for Social Work. She joined the School of Social Work in 2017. She has practice experience in trauma and interpersonal violence, child sexual abuse, child welfare, vicarious trauma, practitioner self-care, and mindfulness. Jennifer has been a licensed clinical social worker since 2006. Welcome. Dr. Kelly O'Leary is a faculty member in the SEAL doctoral program. Kelly is in her 11th year as principal of St. Martin Academy, a tuition-free trauma-sensitive middle school, grades 5 through 8, in New Haven, Connecticut. Kelly is a champion for holistic trauma-sensitive education. She teaches several educational leadership courses at the University of Notre Dame and is thrilled to be joining the faculty of SHU's new doctoral program in education, which focuses explicitly on social emotional learning and academic leadership. Kelly is a proud SHU graduate and received the Alumni Association Young Alumni Award in 2016. She serves on the Dean's Board of Visitors in the Farrington College of Education. Welcome, Kelly. So just a few ground rules before we get the conversation starting. This is intended to be a conversation between Drs. O'Leary and Wilson. Everyone wants to hear from the two educators in this moment, and so, we all have become homeschoolers, and learning about trauma and how that impacts the classroom, whether that classroom be in a school building or at your home, is very relevant and timely. We continue to invite your involvement using the chat feature, so please submit your comments or questions, and we'll do our best to incorporate them into the conversation. So let's get started. Again, this is meant to be a conversation between the two educators. So I'll start with you, Kelly. What are some of the traumas students experience that you find in the classroom? What are some of the traumas they're experiencing?
Well, I guess to take a step back, to really define what a trauma is. And so we can do the simple definition of a scary, overwhelming, unpredictable event. And this is commonly known as our fight, flight, and I'll add freeze to that. And evolutionarily, our limbic brain, our caveman, cavewoman brain, had this response ready to go, which took off executive functioning. The frontal lobe goes offline, and really important because if a bear is about to kill you, you don't really want to reason the odds of what you have fighting against that bear. Really important. The notions of different traumas that students experience got really fleshed out with the landmark study in 1998 called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study by Felitti and Anda. And they identified 10 adverse childhood experiences, one-time events or chronic experiences. And these experiences go into 3 big buckets: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And so what these researchers found is that 4 or more of these ACEs were a better predictor of chronic disease in adulthood than anything else, genetics, lifestyle, for conditions particularly concerning heart disease, diabetes, asthma, cancer, severe obesity. And what we further found in, when we now in schools that we know from the research of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who is a pediatrician out in San Francisco, that kids who have experienced one of the, 4 or more of these 10 ACEs, and it doesn't matter which ones they are, it doesn't matter, it's a hash mark, you can have a mix and match. 4 or more ACEs means that those kids have a 50% harder time learning or have behavioral problems in school compared to students that have 0 ACEs, 0 adverse childhood experiences. And, we know that stress limits our learning and we have difficulty remembering things. And then more stress, we have a lower tolerance for stress. So the traumas my students experience are the same that any individual across our globe would experience.
Thank you. Thank you. Jennifer, I understand that trauma does not always look the same among children and adolescents compared to how it looks with adults. What are the signs and symptoms of trauma or traumatic stress among children?
So I think Kelly did a great job of describing some of the things that students in the classroom may have experienced outside of the classroom, right? So child abuse and neglect, household dysfunction. We can look at symptoms of, for example, post-traumatic stress disorder, where it's actually diagnosed, and we see children demonstrating symptoms such as re-experiencing the trauma, having nightmares, dissociating or going away in their mind, being either withdrawn or maybe aggressive and angry. But I always think it's helpful to also think about these more contextual and interpersonal factors that we see happening for kids who've experienced trauma. With regard to interpersonal trauma, so interpersonal abuse, the relationship between a parent and a child should be one that is protective and nurturing. And when it's one that causes risk or harm, then for children it creates this very unpredictable environment, a lack of a sense of safety or knowing when to trust, what to trust, who to trust. They may become hypervigilant. The one who's there supposed to be protecting them is committing harm. And having an understanding of those contextual factors really helps us to see when we're working with a child or have the child in the classroom, how this plays out in their daily life, right? So they suddenly don't know who to trust, or if the environment becomes unpredictable, or there's, let's say, the schedule or the routine is suddenly thrown off, or they're placed into a group with a child who they don't feel safe with. All kinds of symptoms come out that we wouldn't have expected. It doesn't always look like trauma for kids. They may even just have a diminished interest in things that they were once really interested in. They might be demonstrating sadness or being emotionally withdrawn or just completely detached and not demonstrating any emotional affect at all. We also see what I think is one of the most important things to recognize and be able to work with is emotional regulation. So their ability to know how to respond emotionally to a certain situation. I think we all want to be really protective of children, especially, people who are passionate about teaching. They come into the classroom wanting to be caring and nurturing, and then they also want to reduce discomfort for kids by saying things like, well, that won't matter, or don't worry about that, or it doesn't hurt that bad. So really being able to recognize that children who've experienced trauma need a safe space to feel their feelings, I think is a big part of creating that trauma-informed classroom.
Thank you. Thank you. And Kelly, feel free to chime in, even though I directed the question to Jennifer.
Yeah, no, I think Jennifer, absolutely. I absolutely, that resonates very much so in my school. And what I tell my teachers is you actually cannot distinguish the difference between a student having ADHD, exhibiting a stress response, or being oppositional or defiant. It looks and having a trauma response. You can't tell the difference. And so, for us, the good rule of thumb is to assume, based on just our environment, that everyone has been exposed to some type of trauma. Everyone. That's about being human. And respond in a manner how you would act towards an individual in your family or a friend who has just experienced something awful. And so that's that help, that approach.
Thank you. I'm going to address this next question to you, Kelly, but Jen, feel free to chime in afterwards and continue the conversation. So even before this pandemic, even before distance learning became the norm, there have been continued reports, stating the rise of general anxiety, general depression, and emotional distress among children and adolescents. That kids are basically stressed out in general. What are ways families and schools can mitigate or combat toxic stress in the lives of today's children?
Well, I guess I'm not a clinician, but as an educator, there are really 5 things outside of medication and therapy that are, that individuals can do. And so sleep is really important. Schools don't have a lot of control over students' sleep, but help supporting kids about good sleep hygiene, making sure they're getting enough sleep, having a consistent sleep schedule, limiting blue light in their bedrooms, and, limiting screen time at night that messes with circadian rhythms. Nutrition is another area. Again, schools don't have an immense amount of control over student nutrition. However, whole foods, fruits and vegetables, steering away from highly processed foods or simple sugars. Items that schools really have, authority over, this idea of physical activity and exercise, actual movement, and incorporating that movement. And schools can do this in various ways. And so just being sure that your program, or when you're teaching at home, include some type of physical activity and movement regularly. This is great for transitions. Schools do this with transitions, transition within the classroom, transition to other classrooms. Another piece is about mindfulness, and this has to be taught and important for that to activate that parasympathetic nervous system and disengage that limbic brain, that stress response, that caveman response, and turn back on that executive functioning. So things like breathing activities and mindfulness and meditation and these types of activities are really, really healthy for kids to, one, have an awareness of what their stress response is, a self-awareness of that, wow, I am not feeling myself right now. And what are something I can do to help myself? And the last one that is probably the most important that schools have the authority over is to ensure healthy relationships, particularly with adults that can serve as buffers in stressful experiences. And so kids, in a classroom, something happens, scary, unpredictable, eyes go to the teacher, like, how are you going to address this? How are you going to fix this? What are you going to do? And so that adult has the opportunity to limit that stress for that child in terms of their response. And so that's something that's really important for schools. In addition to when kids are at home in quarantine with, families, there are a lot of stressors. And so having other adults in that child's life to help serve as buffers, because I will tell you as an adult, we are stressed as well. This is brand new for all of us, and to recognize when our brains are offline and we are not emotionally regulating well.
Absolutely. I would just add, Kelly, I think, described all of those things perfectly. And in fact, I have a self-care help sheet for practitioners and people who work with children. And it includes all of those 5 areas, right? So just to share a personal anecdote, I worked with children for many, many years before I actually had my own. And I was pregnant and I bought the book Brain Rules. And it was about, it's about healthy neurological development for your child. And it's written by Medina. It's a great book. And the very first chapter says the best thing that you can do for your child is have healthy relationships and be healthy yourself. And it resonated with me so much as a new mom, and something that I had been working with my clients for so long, and thinking about how all of the adults in the child's life, if they can put into place all the things that Kelly mentioned. We have to be models for sleeping well, for turning our screens off, for emotionally regulating. If that means that we need to get our own help through our support systems or through therapeutic intervention or through our own self-care plan, then I really firmly believe that the best thing that we can do for children is begin creating an environment that is safe because we're safe. And because we have the ability to emotionally regulate and can, just like Kelly said, and my son's first grade teacher talks about the same thing. All the kids look at me and I have to have the answer of what to do, whether it's because we're doing a drill, a fire drill, or it's because we're managing a child who is emotionally acting out in the classroom at the time. And how do all of the other children respond also to the child who's struggling in the classroom? So the teacher is really a model and has to have that same level of wellness.
And when stressful stuff is happening in the lives of teachers, I mean, think about as parents. Think about your car is broken down, your cell phone is, broken, or you can't, or something. It's like overwhelming. And we know these little stressors can overwhelm us as adults. And that's where, in terms of that modeling that Jennifer talked about, is so, so important.
Right. So self-care is even more important now than ever, and it's probably that much more challenging to do that.
Right.
What do you say to educators or parents, teachers who say, I recognize I'm supposed to take care of myself, but I'm having a hard time doing that? What do you say first? What gets in the way of self-care and where to begin?
Yeah, I think recognizing those barriers is a really good start. What are your barriers to self-care? A lot of times people are thinking that it's time. How do we put boundaries around our time to prioritize self-care? Little moments. Kelly talked about mindfulness and breathing. I noticed that when Kelly said the word breathing, both Dr. Cautin and I took a deep breath. Breathing doesn't have to be sitting down and meditating for 30 minutes and setting your timer and trying really, really hard not to think of anything. Meditation can be 3 deep cleansing breaths in any given moment throughout the day that are actually very restorative. So small steps, identifying one goal for yourself. It's a 30-minute walk every day. It's a call to your best friend every Thursday night, whatever it is, starting with those small steps for self-care. And the thing about self-care is that it works. So when you start to feel better and feel like you're taking care of yourself, it has you suddenly find more ways to do that, and you realize the value of it and find ways to integrate it into your life. And I see that over and over again with students, practitioners, other social workers that I work with. When they begin to implement their self-care plan, it really works.
It becomes easier.
Right.
Exercising a muscle. So Kelly, in classrooms today, teachers are expected to be everything for their students in a lot of respects. So how do we propose to teachers now to add becoming trauma sensitive on top of everything else they're required to do?
Well, I absolutely resonate that teachers are being asked to be all things to students. Absolutely. And that's very real. The idea of being trauma sensitive is not something I would say an add-on. It's a paradigm shift. It's this, I'm a big student of Dr. Ross Greene and his mantra that kids do well if they can. And my staff has heard this. This is something that is, we talk about all the time, and not earth-shattering as he describes it, not versus this notion of kids do well if they wanna. And, if kids don't do well if they want to, because they do well if they can. And so being a problem solver in that life of that child to help them, clear away those obstacles of what's getting in the way. And that's really, really important. And so being trauma sensitive means that you recognize that one, behavior is communication, and that this kid may not have the language to share with you that something is really, really going wrong with them. And it might not be in that moment. It might have been years ago, but may not have the language. But their behavior is communicating that, wow, something is wrong. Mm-hmm. And for us to take that opportunity to say, not stop doing that, knock it off, or, why are you doing that? Because a lot of the response is, I don't know, just cause, right? Because it is scary to not know why you're doing something. It feels out of control. Like, of course I have to know, I'm doing it. And to shift more, like, I notice you're having a hard time. What do you think might help make you feel better? And sometimes that is like making that conscious decision that we're going to pause for a second, because continuing the same thing that's not going well let's take a pause and shift. And so being conscious of decisions and to help support and things that are coping mechanisms or fight, flight, or freeze responses, and helping students to shift out of that in a safe, caring environment. So it's about modeling problem solving, which teachers do already. They do this regularly, modeling problem solving and, helping to support kids with all those other areas we talked about, and just making sure that the things that we can control in school are already part of their day, and is, mindful when we are making schedules that help to support all kids and ourselves as well.
I would just add that I think that we have some data to suggest that trauma-informed environments actually have higher satisfaction among the employees and the workers, whether that's in a social service agency, a substance abuse treatment facility, or a school. So I think that what teachers often find when they make that paradigm shift Kelly's talking about is that they have a higher satisfaction with how the students are responding in their classroom. They're feeling more empowered as a teacher, and the students are feeling more empowered to have this more cooperative environment where the students have a voice, and the old disciplinary techniques that just don't really have a positive impact on the classroom aren't necessary anymore. A trauma-informed classroom or a setting of any kind isn't just for people who've experienced trauma. It's really healthy for everybody, right? We're talking about warmth, empathy, establishing routines and predictability, using language that doesn't label, finding ways to create connections among each other and to value those connections and support physical activity, responding when there's an emotional reaction, allowing others to express their feelings. So a lot of those contextual things that you see and feel in a trauma-informed classroom really make everybody feel good. Yeah. And so I think Kelly's comment that it's a paradigm shift may require some training and some practice and some observing, but that the effort once the shift is made is not so much. Right? I don't know, Kelly, if you would agree with that.
No, absolutely. But it does require continual support. And so that we model for our staff exactly that problem solving technique that we want our staff to model with our students. And so to be educators with each other and use those practices really, really important. And it's okay when, we're all human. We didn't deal with that situation really well. We reacted, we didn't respond. We got elevated, we got triggered ourselves because, oh my gosh, this kid, reminds me of my sister or reminds me of my mom. It's just like, ooh, we got elevated. I need to take a step back and breathe. And, having structures in the school that allow you to support kids in that way, that you don't have to be always emotionally regulated because we're not. And so to have that space, that wiggle room to support staff when, dealing with stressful situations. As families know, having their kids home 24/7, it is stressful. It is stressful. And so to give that space.
I was thinking about myself as a homeschooler all of a sudden, and I do teach, but I teach at the graduate level. So teaching the first grade is a new experience for me, and allowing yourself that permission to not always be emotionally regulated, right? But then to know how to correct, how to address, how to, really being transparent with children. I think we underestimate them very often by thinking they can't comprehend or understand something as opposed to saying, I'm sorry, I didn't handle that very well. Can we have a do-over? Let's try this one more time together. And this time I'm going to be patient. I'm going to listen more. I want to hear what you have to say, and making it okay to have a mistake. And
modeling. You're modeling, taking personal responsibility for your reactions. You're modeling that. That's good. Yeah, thank you. I mean, both of you have touched on this already, but maybe you want to add anything to the next question. I'll start with Jennifer. What are some strategies that parents and educators can use to promote healthy development, despite perhaps a child's exposure to trauma?
So I think it's helpful. We have touched on a lot of these specific
Yeah.
strategies, right? But I think it's also really helpful to have some degree of familiarity with developmental tasks that are expected. So having some sense, and it doesn't have to be in-depth knowledge. You don't have to be a developmental specialist or anything. But for early childhood, for example, attachment, bonding, developing a sense of self. So if the child is 4 years old, what we're doing is establishing a trusting relationship, helping them navigate their social environment in a way that feels safe and protected, helping them express their feelings verbally, just starting there, right? If we're talking about a school-age child, thinking about social competencies, academic competencies, establishing peer relationships. So being knowledgeable, I think, about the developmental outcomes that are expected at that age, not expecting them to be developed beyond their developmental stage as well, which I think a lot of parents fall into that trap. And maybe I'm not suggesting not to hold expectations high, because we should hold them high and then help the child rise to meet them. Maintaining connections with friends and family. I think I've noticed how important it is at this time when we're in a position where we have to be sort of socially isolated. How do we maintain those connections with friends and family members, and for our kids to be able to see each other, whether that's on the computer virtually or riding bikes past each other's home or finding ways to maintain connections, is such a critical part of supporting healthy development. Knowing what those developmental tasks are is a big part of it.
Kelly, do you want to add? No.
Yeah, well, I just, in even those developmental tasks, like, so if your kid is really stressed out about math, having a baking activity with your child at an elementary or middle school level, those are meaningful childhood development tasks to work on. Teaching them, how to do laundry, these types of activities, to not get bogged down into, can they, divide two fractions? Can they, multiply or whatever the math task is. And so be okay with, we're going to do other things that are very, critical to the running of this household in this space, because they're not going to have the same number of hours that they would in school, because school is so much more than just that curricular piece. It is that holistic, that social, emotional, that relational, that social piece as well. So to infuse that into kind of what's happening at home.
Thank you. Thank you both. This is very informative. And I think it goes a long way, like you said, like both of you said, not just for those children who have experienced some degree of trauma, but really for all of us, a paradigm shift that embraces kind of a positive, holistic approach to children's well-being in the classroom and out. I really appreciate both of your time and sharing your expertise and experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was great.